Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a beautiful, warm day here on my little island of the earth in San Francisco. I'm out for my usual constitutional. I've been a student of most of the knowledge ways that are common to my people in this time. But as I've mentioned many times before, I think my primary teachers growing up were science fiction authors. When I was very young, my parents, we had these three little blue hardbound books from the late 1800s, and I still have them. They were Jules Verne books. One is Mysterious Island. Not sure if I remember what the other two are properly. Let me think. From the Earth to the Moon and Back, something like this. One of his other books, and they read these books to me. Probably when I was 4 or 5, I was absolutely fascinated by, well, two things really: dinosaurs and space. The exploration of space. And those early experiences, as well as seeing films, particularly Mysterious Island and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which made a huge impression on me. Captain Nemo was my hero. And Jacques Cousteau and Jane Goodall, and the people who were looking deeply into nature. And I was fascinated by both technology and organisms. I really didn't have anything like the view of organisms that the people around me held. As far as living beings, in my young experience, I lived a double life because the people around me seemed to think that the humans were the really important thing, and the other stuff was relatively trivial, particularly insects, which there is nothing trivial about insects. In fact, the entire history of human technological development is absolutely trivial if we dismiss the devastation that it visits on the organismal universe and the organisms of Earth. Completely trivial compared to a single insect. I would trade in a heartbeat the entire history of human technological development for any common gnat and feel like I had come out, like I'd won the lottery. Though my concerns are not, and never really have been, primarily personal, though just like you, I'm a regular human being. So, I was educated by hundreds, if not a few thousand, science fiction stories that I read, and I devoured them. probably one of the first minds I encountered was Asimov's, because 2001: A Space Odyssey had come out as a book, and I'd gotten a hold of it at some point when I was quite young. And I was capable of reading. My vocabulary, wasn't huge when I was little. I'm talking like 5, 6, 7, 8. But I had the peculiar capacity to understand what was meant by an unfamiliar word by taking it in context. And I also came to believe, fairly young, in the perils of young hyperlexicals are not modest. But I came to believe, first really suspect that the science fiction authors were hiding things. That there were probably codes. So, for example, one might imagine that somebody was intelligent enough, or something was intelligent enough, to write 2 books in a single book, such that, just as an example, not as an actual method, you would read book 1 by simply reading the book, but you would read book 2 by decrypting it. And thus, in this sense, a second book could be hidden within any actual book. And disciplines like Kabbalah and Gematria, isosophy in the Greek, these all have something of a similar perspective, right? So at the very least, there is the superficial writing, right? And then secondarily, there's a numeric underpinning, and both the letters and the numbers are not meant to be understood literally, and not even merely symbolically, but esoterically, spiritually. And I have some direct experience of this with the Torah. I explored this at some length when Toymaker was with my mind, primarily at his urging and under his tutelage. So I suspected that at least some of these authors, they also, I think what first led me to this conjecture, which I think is not merely a conjecture, it's obviously true, for example, that these authors were using metaphor in a very deep way, even if there is no actual cryptography going on in the book. But just to give an example, one could imagine that 2 books were written, right? The first book is just the superficial language, and the second book, I'm making up this example, I doubt anyone would do anything this simplistic, but a second book would be found by taking the first letter of the first word, the second letter of the second word, the third of the third, and then, composing a text therefrom. So that 2, texts could inhabit the same book. And this kind of thing certainly has happened. I'm not directly familiar. I never succeeded at decrypting one of the books, though I made some significant attempts around the time I was 8, 9, 10, 11. I started to look carefully at the possibility of systematic a kind of cryptography, right? It was clear to me, however, that these books were written for purposes that were deeply held, and many of them were prophetic or messianic. And these authors, I revered them. I hoped one day to become like them. I could not understand how they could possibly invent these very sophisticated universes, timelines, adventures, and so forth, seemingly out of thin air. Yet, of course, we all have this experience each night when we dream, in which some aspect of our being and awareness and consciousness composes worlds. And perhaps it's disingenuous to say it composes worlds. What we might say is that it composes world-like vignettes. Yeah? And then we are in the composition we are making. Now, it's not also clear that we are the only ones involved in the making, or that even, I mean, fundamentally, the idea that our consciousness is separate and distinct and housed in a, fatty mess of kind of sugary bacon inside our skulls. I think those are nonsensical and very deceptive principles or ideas. They're most of what's wrong with our experience of being human. So, my primary educators were science fiction authors. It wouldn't be entirely true to say I've never been to high school. However, I was a runaway living on the street at 14. And maybe, I went for a time, perhaps 4 months, to Nonesuch School, a hippie school out in the all-ages hippie school out in Sebastopol, closed now, but famous in that area. And I went there for about 4 months when I was a runaway. That was probably 5 months into my adventure of leaving home. And what I was really running away from was Stockton, California, where I left from and had been growing up and went to most of elementary school there at Tully C. Knowles, which at the time was a pretty amazing school. Good teachers, bright students. I was lucky in that regard. In any case, I also spent maybe a month. I had to hitchhike about 30 miles to get to El Molino in Forestville. Went there for maybe a month or two. And then maybe 3 or 4 months in a continuation school that I cannot recall the name of, that was an offshoot of, for the, the welcome back, it was sort of a welcome back Cotter thing for the troubled kids. Yeah, I was there for a few months. And then that was the end of my experience of high school. Let's see. When I was 18, I took a couple of classes at Delta College in Stockton. I had returned to Stockton from being a runaway. Fencing? I can't even remember the other class I might have taken there. And then 2 classes in my early 20s, one on music theory and English 1A, which is mostly essay reading, comprehension, and writing at Santa Rosa Junior College. Richard Speaks was the English teacher, and I ended up co-teaching with him the next semester. But yeah, I have no real formal education to speak of. I'm a autodidact. And I've had people tear me down about this, and particularly tell me that I was lying about reading novels when I was 5, but hey, that's what was going on. I also read children's books. The Scholastic Book Club. We used to get these little catalogs. And I loved getting books on ghosts and riddles and optical illusions and so forth. I am going somewhere with this. I think around the time I was 7 or 8, I wrote a letter to NASA, which back then, wow, what they replied with was just astonishing. Catalogs of spaceships and plans for future space exploration and all this kind of thing. We're probably talking about something like 1970, 71. Oh, they sent me this huge envelope just filled with, I was in heaven. I was just like, this is the best thing. I've got the secret shit. So the reason for this long introduction is that my world has been about science fiction since childhood. And lately I'm listening quite a bit to Ross Coulthart, who's been covering the UFO UAP transition in modern culture, the military, and so forth. Primarily since he may have been working on this before, but primarily since I think David Grush came out. And Ross is a force of nature in the scene, right? But his questions are often kind of ridiculous. Like they're the questions of somebody who is either wildly unenlightened themselves. I don't mean spiritually enlightened, I mean intellectually sophisticated. Or, he commonly plays this game that I might call aping the everyman, right? And he'll say things like, or he'll ask questions which are eminently ridiculous, but I want to put the lie to one of these questions right now. He'll say to someone he's interviewing, trying to think who was it he was talking to recently. Oh, right, it was Jake Barber maybe, can't quite recall. In any case, he says, what do you have to say to people who are skeptical and think this is all just a bunch of bollocks? Why should I believe any of this? And I'd like to answer that question very definitively. And somewhat, aggressively. The seething mounds of abject bullshit that we live in and believe in and trust and place the future of life on Earth into the hands of is so catastrophically stupid, deadly, and wrong that you'd be better off literally just making shit up. because you can trust your imagination so much more than you can trust the bizarre labyrinth of representational bullshit that afflicts modern minds. Compared to UFOs in the sky, capitalism, why would you, like, it's something that captured humans do, but it has nothing to do with being a being, or an organism, or an animal, or a human. In fact, it's explicitly the opposite of what it means to be at all, right? So the things that we, quote, believe in, the extended topology of extremely poorly educated and sometimes well-educated every peoples, is absolutely just shit. So when you're talking about something that's been going on for a good 50,000 years, if you simply poll your friend group, you're going to find people who've had experiences. And yeah, you can decide that they were just confused, and in some cases you'll be right. But none of them were as confused as the nonsense that we're living out at the peril of snuffing this planet. Right? That stuff is absolute bullshit. So to Ross, I would say this: why should you believe anything? I don't give a shit what you believe. I mean, human beliefs are mostly a collection of defensive nonsense against, actual insight, learning, intelligence, discovery, awareness. So I find there was another question he posed today, speaking with a guy who was on the Nimitz, filmmaker now, Sean someone I think, and another gentleman whose name I don't recall. What did he say? Oh my God. I mean, he was making a lot of the idea that anomalous experience runs in families and how peculiar this is. Why would that be peculiar? Don't all kinds of skills run in families? Aren't families the actual vehicle for the preservation of specific skill forms and abilities? I mean, what's bizarre about that? Nothing. What was it he asked? Perhaps it'll come back to me. So I find some of Ross's, this is what it was. Why are they hiding? Why don't they just come down and, talk to us? Well, pretty sure this has happened thousands of times over the past couple hundred years. I mean, who would you go to talk to? Right? The military? Good luck with that. Guess where that's going? The government? I mean, these people are as befuddled, stupid, power-hungry, favor-trading, deadly, criminal. Like, I wouldn't trust those people with silverware. Do you think advanced intelligences would? So, what does it take? Like 60 UFOs over the White House in 1960X? An event that actually occurred? Clearly, okay, so actually one of the more serious answers to this question, instead of just straw manning it, which I do feel like doing, is that if you were looking at the human species from above, right, and you could see its structure, right, you could see the layered topologies of motivation, behavior, habit, thrift activity, structured fictions capturing whole populations, devastating their minds and lives and world. Which group would you pick? Right? Who would you pick? There are, small scale intelligent cohorts, usually less than 50 human bodies that are relatively intelligent and open-minded. But the rest of them are either going to operationalize the contact in ways that will make things worse than they were prior to it, or they're going to make a new religion, right? They're going to cultify it. So who do you go to, Ross? Who do you think you could go to? There's no one you could go to. The military, wrong contact, right? The industry, wrong contact. Give humans technology, worst idea in the history of ideas. The government, wrong contact. The religious leaders, mostly wrong contact. Children, really good contact, Q Vargana in, Africa, in the 90s, where John Mack went. Children are a pretty damn good contact, except nobody believes them. And everyone will try to tell the children that nothing happened. It was just a dream, on and on and on. You were just hallucinating. Oh, no one else saw that. Oh, there's no evidence. I mean, the one thing there is ample evidence of is blatant, entrenched, lethal human group stupidity. Just going back, like anywhere you want to look. Try to find one example of an intelligent cohort at any reasonably large scale of human collectivity. There's almost nothing. I guess some people I could imagine that they might try to contact the United Nations back when that was sort of an actual thing, which it pretty much isn't anymore. So this is one of the answers to that question of Ross's, and it's very surprising to me that it's not obvious to him. Also, there's a question of relationship. Can you have a relationship with a construct? What kind of a relationship is that? Right? Can you have a relationship with the police? Yes, you can. But what kind of relationship will that be? Can you have a relationship with the courts? Same problem. Can you have a relationship with a corporation? Same problem. Can you have a relationship with the Church of Latter-day Saints? Same problem. Right? These constructs are not beings. They act like weird superorganism style entities, but they are dead inside. They don't have feelings. Their intelligence is operationalized for the tasks that have captured them, regardless of how noble any of their original mandates may have been. So who are you going to go to, right? You're going to go to individuals, and you're going to go to children. And you might go to specific temporal situations where there's a high sort of probability of having an effective encounter with someone who won't merely be destroyed by the encounter and can communicate the intelligence into the human cognitium, the network of human minds, sort of non-destructively. Time for me to meditate. I shall return with a much quieter mind shortly. In modernity, we have a variety of words. And sometimes we have words for things we don't understand. I think it's extremely important to clearly, deeply, continuously remember to unforget that the words that we have, none of them, not one of them, explains what phenomena are. There are no explanations for phenomena. There are maps and models. We're really good at understanding what we call mechanical relationships between phenomena that we don't understand, so as to produce predictable mechanical situations, right? The car probably starts damn near every time you turn the key. The toaster always works until it doesn't, and so on. But underlying our modern grasp on the mechanics of a certain register of phenomena is absolute unknowability. And this implies something crucially important about the nature of knowledge itself. Granted that there are many different kinds of knowledge, and that what the word means will change depending on who's speaking and the context and so forth. You know, I've been reading very closely McGilchrist's The Matter with Things, probably a 2,000 page thing. It would be funny if that turned out to be an encrypted thing. But in point of fact, all texts have an encryption layer. Because alphabets are actually non-ordinary. And so is speaking. We're just so familiar with it, and we stop, most of us, being fascinated sometime in childhood. Some of our fascinations are conserved, but they are highly modified by our exposure to the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation that we undergo throughout our lifetimes. So we have these words like UFO, UAP, but we have this particular word, experiencer, which generally is meant to refer to someone who's had some kind of non-ordinary experience. The thing that I want to point out here, which I think is very important to understand, or remain aware of and continually deepen our awareness of, is that we are all experiencers. The early situations of our childhood, our conception, our embryogenesis, our birth, our infancy, and so forth. These are experiences that have nothing to do with what adults and modern humans think, what they believe. They have nothing to do with knowledge. We came here into human form from an entirely non-ordinary array of relationships. These were whittled away at by representational cognition and continue to be, even for me. Even though I'm aware of the problem, I'm like a bird without a flock, although all beings are my flock, in the sense that it's extremely uncommon for me to encounter someone who either has deep non-ordinary experience, I know a few people, or is intelligent in the way that doesn't mostly just ruin their mind. And what is it ruined by? Words, thoughts, and explanations that, function in the representational layer of human activity, and outside of that are mostly useless. There is nothing that is explicable. Mechanical phenomena come close, and we transfer this expectation of explicability. Generally, we are trained to do this, to transfer that onto all phenomena. Well, if we just knew a little bit more, we'd understand what's going on. Bullshit. The problem of mystery is infinite. It's layered infinities, right? You will never encompass it. I've been a student of Zen for many years. I don't consider myself a Buddhist per se, or any kind of ist. This is mostly about unknowing. Like cutting through that entire layered labyrinth of nonsense that is the discriminating mind, right? The mind that measures and qualifies and attaches quantities and identities to ourselves, relationships, and phenomena. Probably the single primary feature of Zen is to slip that trap and thus acquire direct, intimate, personal realization of the... It's ridiculous to make language about this. I don't even know how I could try to make an analogy, but it would fail. It's like trying to make a rock about cats or something, or, a fork. It's like trying to make a fork about cats. Yeah, the fundamental sort of core of Zen is liberation from the discriminating aspect of awareness, which we confuse with ourselves. Right? We think, oh, this is what I am. I'm a Darren, I'm a man, I'm an animal, I'm a snack for sharks, right? Whatever. Mostly I'm a snack for modernity. It's much worse than sharks. People are like, I'm terrified of sharks. You should be much more afraid of, like, the United States government or Google. These things will eat your soul, right? Your body, relatively disposable. Your soul, not the same thing. So my point here is that we are all experiencers, but our capacity for this experience is catastrophically, recursively self-limited by thinking, knowledge. The stuff we do with our minds when we're trying to understand. And what's absolutely clear is that intimacy and relationship are the actual basis of everything that's going on. So earlier listening to a Kurt Jaimungal podcast for the second time with I think his name is Jake Barbour. And he was saying something very similar to what I'm saying here, although in terms that a physicist would use. And what he was saying is that quantum mechanics probably doesn't exist. It's a misunderstanding of things that are based fundamentally on shape and relation, and that the actual situation that is accessible to, RepCog, representational cognition, math, physics, and so forth, is vastly simpler than anything we've previously supposed, which seems relatively likely to me. But it's based on relationships between features of time-space, right? Particularly the features we call particles. Now, I've been at pains to say things like this for, hundreds of recordings. And some of you are probably getting tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. I'm not necessarily, because I'm a different person today. I'm a new thing. I'm a new being, a new way of being in this moment. And in each moment, we humans have this thing where we're like, oh, you told me that before. And so we ignore it. Or, we shut it down. You've already told me this. Now, sometimes it's reasonable to shut that down, because if what's being, voiced is trivial, or tedious, and we don't really want to invest our attention in it, okay. But there's another way of understanding something resembling this problem, which is that I am new now here, you are new now here. We speak of things that have been spoken of before. If they're actually powerful or insightful or liberating, we may need to hear them a few times, and there will always be new features available to our awareness, thought, consideration, perspective, and so forth. And each time when I do my walk and talks, there are, the context is new. So even if I say similar or possibly even the same things, I'm trying to remind myself how to pay attention, what to attend, how to not forget or unforget some of these things. The raptors are quite vociferous today around here. I love them. They're amazing beings. This world, our planet, the closest, there are two branches of human literary endeavor that are, how to put this, clearer and more insightful than most of the other branches. And the first is poetry, because it appeals to the aspects of our awareness from which insight may arise, and novelty. And I'm just going to bookmark this word anomalism for a minute here, because I want to come back to it. And science fiction. This world is pure sci-fi. The humans have no idea what's going on here. Qua the species, zero. They've got nothing. The children have a natural endowment of clarity, awareness, memory, and understanding that has nearly nothing to do with language or conceptual thought. It has to do with the memory of origin. They are living exemplars of origin in this way. Again, the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation quickly whittle that away and replace it with a lot of structured nonsense that is functional, again, in the, human repcog layer or whatever. It works in the human world. If you were to try to use that stuff in nature, you'd be dead before you could get started. Exceptions noted. So we are all experiencers. This was we began belonging to that peculiar class of humans for whom non-ordinary experience is primal and primary. And it might be surprising to try to consider this, but the aspects of your awareness with which you vet information, explanations, and so forth, those aspects of you, and you are not a separate being or thing in the way you think, not by a long shot, trivially so, yes, but deeply not. The features of our minds with
How's his arm doing?
That we vet information with are fundamentally non-ordinary. It is impossible to explain them. It's not just unlikely, or if we had more information we could get it right. No, they're completely impossible to capture with explanation. In the same way that the intuitions with which we validate mathematical processes or methods are not themselves mathematical. Even if you do the infinite ladder thing where you just keep making a hole at this layer and going to a higher layer and looking from there, you get an explanation. That explanation needs a hole that goes to a higher layer and so forth. You'll never catch up. We should have great reverence and respect and wonder and awe for mystery, incompleteness, intuition, and intimacy. I'm sure there are people who think they know, who Darren is. But what about the entire blurry space around Darren that transforms depending on how you relate with Darren? What about that? Have they got that all encapsulated too? Well, one guy thinks he does. And maybe a couple of guys, or three. Of all of my experiences as a human being, one of the most profound experiences that I've ever had, and it's, it can become sort of normalized and I can come to take it for granted, or at least a long time ago I was capable of this. I don't know what would happen now. It's been forever since I've truly kissed a woman whom I'm in love with. But that experience of kissing is among the most profound of my human experiences. Certainly as a body, as an animal, as a man. This is an entirely different kind of knowledge, right? It's experience, it's intimate, it's physical, it's biological, it's transcendental. This is something I deeply trust, and we should think much more like this if we're trying to understand anything, but particularly if we're trying to understand exotic, quote-unquote phenomena like UFOs and UAPs. The question isn't why don't they just show themselves? Why don't they just come up and tell us who they are, right? Well, I can think of a plethora of reasons why that would be a very bad idea. Though it may have occurred historically, I think it almost certainly did occur historically, when it was much less dangerous for the humans and the world. But if you think about the unique situations, historically and perhaps even futurially, right, in terms of the possibility or the likelihood of retrocausation, that lead to the kissing of two people who will become the parents of a child. Right. Now you're starting to understand something more about how the universe actually is. It doesn't matter at all what humans want to think, what they believe, what they think should happen. With an organism that disoriented, its idea of shouldness should be disposed of. would be, we'd all be better off if that shit was just mostly disposed of. Again, exceptions noted. So what actually goes on is that relationships are forged. And this is the nature of nature. Primally, this is what has precedence. So when there are situations in which humans have experiences of anomalous phenomena, the fundamental purpose is relationship. It's not fulfilling what you or someone or Ross or Jake or Sean or anybody, Lou, David, just naming some names, Diana, Jacques, it has nothing to do with what they think should happen in a general hypothetical sense at all. There are 0 actual hypotheticals in human experience. None. Hypotheticals are abstractions produced by thinking, belief, supposition, perspectival collapse, and purpose. We should be really aware of this thing, because the hypotheticals that are often posed in common culture and media and the internet and so forth, it's not as if we can't use hypotheticals intelligently, it's just that we mostly don't. I love the story, probably from The Master and His Emissary, but it could have also been from an Ernst Cassirer book that I love. He's got this little book that's just astonishingly brilliant, amazing. Perhaps the title will come to mind. It's a very short book. It's like 70 pages or something, and it's just one of the most astonishing things I've ever come across. But I love this story where, they're trying to understand the mindset of, for example, I can't remember who was actually involved. And, strangely, this all reaches me hypothetically through writing, right? Through someone who wrote a book. But they took a man aside and they said something like, in Egypt there are no camels. Of course, there are probably a lot of camels in Egypt. They picked some city, right? Maybe it was Paris. And so they said, like, in France there are no camels. Paris is a city in France. Hi. Are there any camels in Paris? And the interviewee said, yes, of course. And they said, but we've told you that Paris is a city in France, and there are no camels in France. And the interviewee said, yes, but France is a very big place, and Paris is a very sophisticated city, I think. And so almost certainly there are camels there. This is the difference between people who believe hypotheticals and people who are centered in experience. Yeah? This is maybe the most important difference that can possibly obtain for human beings. This is what Zen is about, actually. This is what the UFO topic is about, actually. Right? Time-space is nothing like what humans think it might be or should be, or how they're thinking about it at all. There's no resemblance to that, or such a superficial resemblance that it's the difference between, the wrapping of a candy bar and what's actually inside the wrapper. The wrapper was produced for purposes, human capitalistic purposes, sell some candy. And the human ideas about time-space are very similar in this regard. Right? It's about little cults of belief that we know what's going on out there. No, we don't have any idea what's going on out there. In fact, what's going on out there is so infinitely weird that you shouldn't be worried about your ideas. You should be concerned with relation with it. You're made of it. You come from it. You are its fingertip, its living fingertip on this world, in this time. Just as if all of time, space, and relation forged this strange multidimensional cone, and at one point end of that cone, there you are. That's what you are. It's not a what, it's really a bunch of relationships and intimacies. So I find it hilarious when, for example, Ross Coulthart says, isn't it strange that these things seem to run in families? Well, what did you think families are, Ross? I mean, from what perspective are you confused? What's generating this confusion? Ross often uses this word fascinating. It's fascinating, but it's not fascinating. It's facile. Ross's approach to it is facile. I mean, good on him for all that he's doing and has done. But a lot of his perspectives are very surprising from someone who's had so much, such a beautiful salad of encounters with human beings and situations and so forth who are carrying memories of direct experience of these phenomena. And everybody seems really upset about the ambiguity. Like, well, it's so ambiguous. Over here it looks like they're clowning with us. Over here it looks like they're doing genetic tests or some kind of reproductive thing. And over here they're telling us our technology is bad and we're poisoning the planet. And over here, they're giving spaceships to the US military and blah, 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 blah. It's so ambiguous. Well, it's not surprising because human cohorts are wildly, unpredictably ambiguous. Everything in nature is fraught with perilous, infinite depths of ambiguity. Even if there is superficially the momentary appearance of concreteness and distinctness, continuity over time. Right? The trees I stand among now, beautiful, astonishing, noble beings. They're very likely to be here tomorrow. When I return to my home, most likely I will find it in the condition that I left it, probabilistically, according to my expectations. However, if I become a different person, if I radically transform before I get home, will my house be the same thing? Are there any two things that are the same? What is this similitude really about? All of my life, I became aware when I was very young that human knowledge, obviously I respected, my parents were gods effectively. I mean, they drove cars and bought TVs and made dinner and things. And I adored them. And they were good to me. One moment. Bad machine noises nearby. But it was very apparent to me from a very young age that this language thing was problematical because the adults spoke in ways that denied relationship and presented fictions as primal, authoritative, true, factual, real, constantly. and it's a weird sort of religion among the humans, right? That what actually matters is your ability to pay the fucking rent, and that you can go to the doctor when you're sick, and that you can drive the car to get the groceries. These are the things that are true and real. And that courts of law tell you what is true and what is ethical and moral, and all of these ridiculous, deadly ideas. Right? So, I mean, the first clue I had was that they thought insects were, trivial nothings, like little machines in nature that just go around doing things automatically. It was obvious to me that organisms were complete, fully fledged beings, although I could not articulate this as a child. It was blatantly obvious. So I lived two lives, right? I was essentially trained to live two lives because I could not believe, it's that weird word again, the fictions that the humans were promoting as the absolute arbiters of identity, meaning, value, characteristic, quality, and so forth. I knew those were wrong, and yet all of the humans around me were like fundamentalists, proselytizers of the strange religion of we know what things are. It's a cult. This whole knowing what things are thing, it's a cult. Again, right, useful in a register of our common experience and activity, absolutely lethal when transferred beyond the useful scope or into belief or certainty or any of these things. People are like, I don't believe in UFOs. I don't give a shit what you believe in. I mean, I care about what you believe in to the degree that it's lethal and deadly and toxic and immiserating. I care about that part of it, right? I'm concerned with the traps that the humans have made for themselves and how to untrap us. But I don't give a shit. People are like, where's the evidence? I don't know, 10,000 reports per fucking day, right? It's like people saying, well, you can't prove that rain actually comes from the sky. It could come from the ground. I don't know. I mean, where's the evidence? The fact that some of the evidence has been intentionally misconstructed by cohorts or people has no bearing on the fact. It's just like people telling you the earth is flat, right? They can concoct evidence for that proposition. It's not untrue at a scale, right? There's a scale if you approach a circle closely enough, yeah, or if the circle's big enough and you look at the edge. It just looks like a straight line. Once again, you see the problem of scope. Yeah? And this is fundamental to all problems in human thought, cognition, identification, evaluation, so forth. I don't care if people believe or don't believe or what they think. Anomalies are most of what's going on. Human knowledge isn't merely limited, it's recursively self-limiting. As if there's some kind of weird, purposeful demon orienting and creating this situation, but it doesn't require a demon. All you really need is the absence of intimacy and relation. That's enough to produce the problem, right? The attention is directed toward representations, concepts, language, models, maps, processes, which are primarily forged for purposes of utility, commerce, war, lying, power, and capturing whole populations of humans. So people want, to hold in their hand a piece of a UFO, and it's not enough, right? There's no amount of evidence that could convince you that actual experiences are real. But this is what reality is made of, actual experiences. So I've been an anomalist my entire life. For many years, and I think it still exists, there was this site called anomalist.com that constantly was reporting, the anomaly news. All of the features of the branch of knowledge we call science, and I want to make it very clear that the weird, seemingly separate branches of human knowledge, there's nothing separate about them. There's a perspective from which you can produce a form of knowledge that unifies all those branches and speaks to every one of them at the same time. We just don't do that around here. I'll be back in a bit. Most of what is interesting and intelligent and beautiful, astonishing, awe-inspiring, most of what can rip us out of the coffin-like structure of representational cognition in which even I myself live when not kissing is inexplicable. What is the meaning of this word imagination? Does it mean to make stuff up? It can. But imagination is actually, without that, you'd be incapable of understanding. In one way, if you were deprived of that, you'd be incapable of language or anything, right? Because this often denigrated feature, and sometimes, reasonably denigrated, is actually the origin of awareness. It's the origin of people's concerns about imagination. I love that one of my heroes, Edgar Allan Poe, actually, I'm not sure about what I'm about to say next, but I think it's likely to be real, quote unquote. I think one of his books was called Tales of Mystery and Imagination. I mean, he might as well have called it Tales about what actually is. Anomaly is most of what's going on, especially if we're comparing it to what humans have made conceptual or linguistic derivations of. So I've always been very attentive to all that sits outside, right? To all that is outside what humans expect, why they expect it, what they're familiar with, what they think, what they believe. The outside of that is where I live. And somebody was taking me to task for this the other night, rather painfully actually, someone close to me. And we're like, you set yourself apart. You speak of the humans and then you as though you're outside of that. And they're not wrong. But I live in a way of being with and in my mind that is wildly uncommon among the humans I have met and known. And yet each one of them is made of this. So it's ironic. I'm also the first to admit that I'm a regular human. Right? I like a good hamburger. I watch things on screens that are dead inside and ruin my biorhythms. Destroy the empire of Circadia. So these are some of my thoughts for today. So grateful to have this time and for your attention, curiosity, wonder, passion, and the missions that you brought into your human incarnation. I wish you bliss and happiness and the fulfillment of the promise of this amazing, astonishing, impossible gift that we together enjoy and so rarely understand. May your dreaming be deep, rich, and profound. Your relationships vital, intimate, and alive. And may adventure rather than safety, lead your awareness and transform your habits. Please take a moment, tickle the algorithm, like, share, support my work, whatever feels right. Send me a scathing criticism. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.